God, in their infinite wisdom and providential goodness, has appointed the offices of rulers and councils for the welfare of society and the just government of man. We beseech thee to behold with thy abundant favor as thy servants whom thou hast been pleased to call to the performance of such important trusts in the Commonwealth of Dominica. Let thy blessings descend upon us here in this Parliament assembled, and grant that we may, as in thy presence, treat and consider all matters that shall come under our deliberation in so just and faithful a manner as to promote thy honor and glory, and to advance the good of those whose interest thou hast committed to our charge, all which we ask in the name and for the sake of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. House resumes and debate continues. Yes, Senator Parrish, I recognize you. You may proceed.
Mr. Speaker, other parliamentary colleagues, I stand here this morning to make some brief remarks on the 2023-2024 budget that's before the House for approval. Let me first congratulate Dr. McIntyre. It's a voice that I grew to trust as a young man, because he may have treated me a couple of times. So when he speaks, I usually listen and believe everything that he says, but you know. So just congratulations, Dr. Mac, a really good presentation. And Mr. Speaker, the ideals of euphoria that we're hearing from our other parliamentary colleagues, it reminds me of a folk tale of a young peasant boy who generally is pretending to be something that he's not, and he's trying to influence a young innocent princess of taking her to places that she's never been and showing her a world that she's never seen. And he will do all of that on a flying magic carpet. And if she will only believe in him and just trust him, he could show her so many things. But Mr. Speaker, Dominica is not a fairy tale land where things happen to be a shining, shimmering splendor. And the Parliament is not a magic flying carpet. The people of Dominica are real people. Their issues are real, their plight is hard, and that is something that must be taken seriously. Mr. Speaker, the Minister reminded us, the Minister of Finance in his presentation reminded us that we are living in uncertain times. Times filled with difficulty, but also filled with opportunity. But Mr. Speaker, somehow it seems that we are not taking hold of all of the available opportunities that we have. The real story, Mr. Speaker, is in these 48 pages, 438 pages rather, of estimates. A story that tells of some differences that no showmanship can hide. And I was so excited when the Minister of Energy presented, because he's really good, man. He's a good showman. I like his presentations, Mr. Speaker. But no showmanship can hide the real story. That, based on what the administration is saying, the energy and focus is on something else. Mr. Speaker, energy flows where focus goes. And at this time in Dominica, people of Dominica are they're really not feeling the energy. Apparently, they're somewhere else. Mr. Speaker, the Minister indicated that the government has some new pillars that they are using to aid in navigating global challenges. One of these pillars, actually point number 3, emphasizes the investment in the productive sectors. And that is good to hear, Mr. Speaker. That is really good to hear, warming. But Mr. Speaker, the ECCB, financial authority in the region that we all subscribe to, as a matter of fact, the Minister of Health sits on the Monetary Council, in their 2022-2023 report has outlined several concerns in the currency union. And they have made some recommendations about sustainable growth. In their words, Mr. Speaker, for Dominica to accelerate its economic growth, it must build resilience and it must invest in the private. It must invest in the productive sectors, such as agriculture, tourism, manufacturing, and job creations. And according to the minister, I doesn't understand that. According to the minister, the government has taken the decision to increase its budgetary allocations to the productive sectors to facilitate the emergence of new business and expand existing business. And Mr. Speaker, the numbers tell a different story. Now, I listened to the Minister of Agriculture yesterday, and he's talking. Well, I don't know. I don't know if he's correct, because Mr. Speaker, the amount of money I hear the Minister of Agriculture calling yesterday, and then he was talking about monies that we spent since Maria and since Erica and so on and so on and so forth. Mr. Speaker, that is not reflected here in these estimates. I'm not sure if it reflected somewhere else. He maybe have numbers that I don't have, but it's reflected somewhere else. Mr. Speaker, in the approved budget of 2022-2023 under the public sector investment, at only 8.27%, a sum of 46,852,374 was approved for the Ministry of Blue and Green Economy, Agriculture, and National Food Security. But for some reason, Mr. Speaker, only $19,842,076 was spent. Of that amount, $7.2 million was spent in the rehabilitation of the Marigot and Roseau fisheries complexes. Now, Mr. Speaker, that's very strange, because that does not suggest that agriculture is a priority. Now, like I say, Mr. Speaker, I stand corrected. Maybe the Minister of Agriculture have numbers we don't have. And if he does, that's very unfair, because they gave us this document. That doesn't suggest, that type of performance doesn't suggest that we're interested in reduction of the food import bill and investing in agriculture. While resources are available, but we are not investing them in one of our most critical and important productive sectors. Mr. Speaker, the ECCB records that Dominica is one of two current countries in the currency union where the food import bill increased last year as a percentage of global or total imports, forming 21% of the total imports into the island. All while we have resources allocated for the investment in agriculture that are being unspent. And Mr. Speaker, I heard the Minister of Energy and even the Minister of Finance, and everybody is talking about people should, grow what they eat and eat what they grow. But Mr. Speaker, we're not helping them to do that, because we are leaving allocated funds for the Ministry of Agriculture unspent. I don't know, maybe we didn't have anywhere else to spend it, but like I say, I stand corrected. I almost bazooed last night when I heard the Minister of Agriculture calling numbers. Mr. Speaker, what further worries me is that last year our allocation under the public sector investment for agriculture was 8.27%. This year it is much lower at 6.77%. Mr. Speaker, that does not seem like an increase in allocation to a productive sector, right? So, again, Mr. Speaker, the numbers is telling a different story. That type of trend, Mr. Speaker, I am not sure how it will get us from a $274 million contribution to GDP to a $700 million contribution to the GDP, because we're leaving money unspent. Mr. Speaker, in one of our other productive sectors, tourism, the numbers is telling, well, the numbers usually tell a story, but this time it's telling something else, Mr. Speaker. It's much bigger than a story. Somebody would say it's a scandal, but I wouldn't say that. I would never say something like that. Because, Mr. Speaker, an allocation of $15,334,598 was allocated for the sector in 2022-2023. A productive sector with so many cross-linkages and cross-cutting industries that benefit from the development of the sector. But, Mr. Speaker, we only spent 10.7% of that allocation, $1.6 million out of the public sector investment allocation for tourism. How is that possible? How is that possible, Mr. Speaker? How do we feel knowing that we could have done better for our vendors? How do we feel knowing that we left money on the table in the last budgetary or the last reporting period? How do we explain that to our vendors? How do we explain that to the other stakeholders within the tourism industry and who benefit from the tourism industry? Mr. Speaker, that is very, very challenging for me to understand. It's almost frightening. According to the ECCB, again, Mr. Speaker, we are expected to increase our stayover visitors in 2025. Right? Now, if that is to happen, if we continue this trend of underspending in the public sector investment areas in our productive sectors, that won't happen. Because if we don't develop the tourism product, Mr. Speaker, there will not be much more to see or do here. And that brings me to our 500,000, the road to 500,000 visitors by 2030. Great sounding initiative, Mr. Speaker. If we have it, if we can do it, absolutely wonderful. Now, Mr. Speaker, I fear that we have left out some important considerations. Mr. Speaker, our tourism offering will have to be diversified in order for us to do that. And I'm sure it is said that we're expecting to diversify. But this would mean significant impact on the natural environment, and we need to employ sustainable tourism planning to protect the environment, to protect our culture and the heritage of Dominica, and to ensure that we implement more responsible tourism practices that help to preserve our natural resources, minimize our ecological footprint, and ensure the long-term viability of the industry. Mr. Speaker, congratulations are in order because we signed the contract for the development of the Marina. I'm very happy about that. No, man, I good, man. You remember I planting cocoa, you know, so we good. We come into that. Mr. Speaker, but I wondered what happened with that Marina development in the last fiscal year, Mr. Speaker, because the same $27 million has been budgeted for it this year was budgeted last year, and nothing was spent on the Marina. Now, I understand, Mr. Speaker, that the Minister of Finance said it would take 2 years to develop, and that's understandable. It's a construction project, a large project, $27 million. But, Mr. Speaker, if while the project, if we expect it to take 2 years to develop, Mr. Speaker, we expect works to be ongoing for the entire period. We expect the designs to happen. We expect, surveys and so. But, Mr. Speaker, no money was spent out of that $27 million. So we didn't pay for the studies? No, I don't have to ask that. The budget says $0 was spent on it. The budget says zero. You read that? Good. Mr. Speaker, under the area of technical vocational skills. Technical vocational skills. Mr. Speaker, much was said about the development of a technical vocational school, building a school that we will use to facilitate vocational skill sets. Now, Mr. Speaker, we're not going to focus on the Secretariat and the status of the TVET Council, and so we're going to leave that alone. But let's focus, Mr. Speaker, on the opportunity that exists right now. The opportunity that exists where we have large capital projects currently being undertaken. Mr. Speaker. We have a significant, a unique opportunity, Mr. Speaker, where we can set up a structured arrangement to have young people and people who are existing, maybe not so young, in technical vocational skills, and people who are interested in pursuing technical vocational careers to be trained on these projects to help them develop their capacity. And Mr. Speaker, we can even use the opportunity to train, give them the experience, get them engaged in the transfer of knowledge and technology, and maybe even provide qualification and certification on these projects. Well, Mr. Speaker, is any effort being done in that regard? I know that we were planning to build a school, but are we training our people now so that when the next international airport is being built, and when another international airport is being built, and when we have other large capital projects, that these young people who are trained under these capital projects can find employment? They can increase. Mr. Speaker, we go in nice all the time.
Yes, members, please allow the senator to deliver his
we go in nice all the time.
Yes.
But yes, Mr. Speaker, we have an opportunity to increase our local, technical, and vocational skill set. But I fear that we are not using that opportunity. We can make structured arrangements with the developer and the international construction agencies that we have here to train our young people as part of the agreement, right? And then we can study, we can build a school, we should build a school. But Mr. Speaker, we must not lose the opportunity now to train our people and improve our capacity. Mr. Speaker, we spoke about the contract signing for the 6 schools that we're about to build. And that is good, Mr. Speaker, of course. Much was said about congratulating and thanking the People's Republic of China for their continued support. Clap, clap, because I too, Mr. Speaker, would like to, Mr. Speaker, would like to express some gratitude to the People's Republic of China for their continued support to Dominica. That is undeniable, and nobody can say that China has not supported Dominica. We would like to thank them. But Mr. Speaker, no mention was made of an open, transparent procurement process where the government used a process to select the best contractor at the best price for the construction of these schools. No mention was made of the intended or the stipulated local participation on these projects. Right, Mr. Speaker? No mention was made of that. Now, Mr. Speaker, no mention was made either of how the involvement of this local participation would result in economic buoyancy for our community. Maybe we'll get that information later, I don't know. But I'm just saying no mention was made of it. And I want to point out that it is important for us to take hold of these opportunities for local participation, Mr. Speaker. Because, Mr. Speaker, when we lose the opportunity to stipulate and enforce local participation in our own capital projects, it becomes a justification for why large sums of money continue to leave Dominica through foreigners who work here, sending them to their friends and family overseas, Mr. Speaker. Nobody has ever said in the history of Dominica that, boy, Dominicans doing so well that they're the ones sending remittances overseas. Nobody has ever said in Dominica's history, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that farmers and teachers and doctors and lawyers and policemen and nurses in Dominica do so well that they can send out barrels to their friends and family overseas at Christmas time, right? Now, Mr. Speaker, nobody has ever boasted that these same people in the public and private sector in Dominica can send out $214 million a year overseas to their family and friends. So, Mr. Speaker, I understand with tax coming, but the money gone. Mr. Speaker, I understand that it would take a lot of courage for someone to admit that the efforts of this government, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Members, please allow the senator to deliver his debate address. Everybody will get a turn to respond. I mean, we can have a little cross-talk, but we cannot be disturbing him. Please, let's proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on the area of geothermal development, we have done well. Congratulations to our Energy Minister. Mr. Speaker, actually, when he was speaking, I could literally see the steam coming off of his shoulders because I know he worked so hard in that industry. Mr. Speaker, the development of our energy mix is likely to help us to reach our renewable energy targets by 2030. The only problem I have with that, Mr. Speaker, is that 2030 is a long time. That is 2 election cycles away, and I'm not sure if the minister will still be here because it's him alone we can trust with that, right? So, I don't know, it's a long time, 2 election cycles. So, Mr. Speaker, it worries me because it gives me a lot of fear that we may not have enough time to get this right because it's 2 election cycles. You sure?
Positive.
All right, Mr. Speaker, congratulations. Mr. Speaker, 50 homes in Warner and Cotton Hill for young professionals, the youth and employees in the public and private sector to help them realize their dream of owning a home. Mr. Speaker, that is a good thing. But Mr. Speaker, it was budgeted for last year. The same $5 million rolling over this year. And nothing was done. Well, Mr. Speaker, let me not say that. I don't know if the figures, I don't know, Mr. Speaker. What I can say is that nothing was spent. It shows $0 spent in the estimates. Now, Mr. Speaker, money is not the problem. Land is not the problem. Access to international and local construction support is not the problem. So, Mr. Speaker, maybe it didn't have any young people in the last financial reporting period that were dreaming. It didn't have no young professionals that were dreaming that these houses could have benefited. So that's why we didn't start it, and they are not available. And Mr. Speaker, I also want to ask for a little bit of clarification because yesterday, the Minister for Fisheries, he taught me to do a little quick maths in my head there. And $5 million, 50 homes, if I do a little quick maths in my head there right now there, that's about $100,000 per unit. Mr. Speaker, the way inflation going, the Energy Minister spoke about the increase in inflation, the Ukraine war, we like to talk about those things. The way inflation going, I'm not sure $100,000.
10 more minutes.
10 more minutes, we're moving fast. Mr. Speaker, health and wellness. Our health sector is not often looked at as a productive sector. And Mr. Speaker, without a functioning healthcare system, none of your sectors will be productive. Because if your people cannot access or they have fear about accessing proper healthcare management, it is unlikely that they would be productive. Now, the Minister of Health, the Minister of Finance, sorry, the Minister of Health to talk it, we come into that. When Minister of Finance mentioned that the government has taken note of the concerns expressed by the public about their experience with the healthcare system and healthcare facilities. But Mr. Speaker, that must not be glossed over, We must not pretend that, we hear what you say and we understand and, we'll write up in somewhere and that will just, blow away with the wind. That, we cannot continue to pretend as though the plight of the people as it relates to their concerns with healthcare in Dominica is not a real thing. It's real people, and sometimes they have traumatic, horrific stories about their experience with the healthcare system. The minister said that they noted that. And Mr. Speaker, if we leave these things unchecked, and we have the money to solve it, we have the money to address it, if we leave these things unchecked, what will happen is that our people will continue to live in fear. They will continue to live in fear that if something happens, they are not sure that they have access to proper health care. Now, Mr. Speaker, the minister did talk about the facilities, and that is true. We can see the facilities. The facilities are there. I mean, look at our theaters. The theaters are there, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, the people live in fear that they cannot access proper healthcare management. Somebody has to speak up for the health teams and the doctors and the nurses that have a difficult time, or they report that they have a difficult time offering healthcare to the people and the citizens of Dominica. Yes, Mr. Speaker, somebody has to speak up for them because the facilities are there, but they find it difficult. Mr. Speaker, 10 minutes I have, so I'm moving fast. So when the minister speaks about world-class and first-class healthcare, I have a problem with it, Mr. Speaker, because the Margaret Hospital is still closed. The Margaret Hospital is still closed. I called this morning to check to see if it had anybody there opening and so dressing rooms. And nobody's there. The hospital is still closed. My friend, the Minister of Health, took us on a nice tour up there. Mr. Speaker, I can tell you firsthand, it's a beautiful structure. There are things in there that, you know, things you've never seen. But it closed. It closed. Mr. Speaker, performative healthcare is more than just a facility. And when we say that we have access to world-class healthcare and the Margaret Hospital is still closed more than 2 years after its construction has been completed, Mr. Speaker, that is intolerable. That is difficult to bear, and I hope that we can appreciate the patience and the tolerance of the people of Margaret, the health team in Margaret, and the people of the Northeast. Because, Mr. Speaker, they can see the facilities there and they still have a very difficult time accessing that first-class healthcare that the minister spoke about. We can talk about the money that was spent and unspent in the health sector, but I don't have all the time for that. My papers find a way. Non-productive sectors. No, I can't take my time. I don't have much time. Mr. Speaker, an indication that our fiscal policy is lacking and may not be people-centered is in the indication in our banking sector, right? Dominica is a very liquid place, Mr. Speaker. We have money. We have money. Hold on, I come in. We have money, Mr. Speaker. Dominica is very, very liquid. And the ECCB actually records that. But, Mr. Speaker, what is very telling is that our non-productive loans, as a matter of fact, the non-productive loan ratio is hardly above the prudential benchmark of 5%. Dominica is almost 3 times that, at 13.8%. Mr. Speaker, non-productive loan is when somebody take a loan and they have not paid it or made regular payments between a period of 90 or 180 days. So the people listening, right? Non-productive loans. People can't pay their loans. But, Mr. Speaker, that also checks out because the ECCB is recommending that we increase our tax administration. Mr. Speaker, what is happening, Mr. Speaker, is that the ECCB is recording that Dominica's economy is skyrocketing. True. But we can't collect tax. The tax collections is falling dramatically. And why is that, Mr. Speaker? It is because Dominica has money, but it is not in the hand of the people. And that is why they cannot pay their loans and they cannot pay their taxes. They cannot pay their loans and they cannot pay their taxes, but we're saying we have a buoyant economy. Mr. Speaker, the numbers are telling a different story, right? Mr. Speaker, on the issue of the CBI, right? Our blessed CBI. Mr. Speaker, I would beg your indulgence.
You can proceed because it's silent now.
Yes. Mr. Speaker, we have received numerous recommendations about our CBI. That is true, right? And we ourselves have actually admitted that our CBI program, there are things that we are doing to make it more robust and so on. That is true, right, Mr. Speaker? But it accounts for 60% of Dominica's revenue. Last time I was here, well, not the last time, the time before the last, I begged the Minister of Finance for little assistance because there was some confusion about some numbers and so on and so on and so forth. But nobody took me on, Mr. Speaker. Nobody decided to answer me on the questions that I asked regarding the CBI numbers. So, Mr. Speaker, I am not going back in those numbers. Not going back in those numbers and not asking any questions about that. Right? Other people have asked questions about that and nobody is answering that. Nobody that have the figures is answering that. So, Mr. Speaker, we're leaving that alone. But the problem is, Mr. Speaker, there are people who have concern about our CBI program that we cannot ignore. They are making sure that we do not ignore them. Visa restrictions are being imposed. And now we are hearing about 6 new EU guidelines for countries that have CBI programs. One of them in particular, point number 5, is that all of the monies from CBI programs or the proceeds of the funds must go back to the host country. And Mr. Speaker, that is a good thing because seeing that our government, in and outside of the parliament, have been hearing about making sure that all our CBI proceeds are in the consolidated fund, I am sure that we have done a lot of work on that already and we have no problem complying with point number 5 of the 6 new EU regulations for CBI countries, Mr. Speaker. But Mr. Speaker, even while the Minister of Energy spoke about, we made very light of the fact that, these are another problem, we like worms, so we will survive, and that is true, Dominica is resilient. Now, Mr. Speaker, we have a projection of $617 million as proceeds from CBI funds, right? My question, Mr. Speaker, if anybody intends to take the challenge of answering, is how do we expect those new regulations to affect our projection?
2 more minutes.
Because, Mr. Speaker, just press it. Go ahead, stand up. 10 minutes.
Okay, it's on now. Can I request 15 more minutes from Mr. How many? 10 you want? 10 more minutes for Mr. Paris.
You are a member of parliament, you can move a motion.
Okay, I move a motion to request 10 more minutes for Senator Paris.
Any seconder?
Second. I second the motion.
It has been moved and seconded that Senator Paris be given an additional 10 minutes. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against?
Mr. Speaker, I have it. The ayes have it.
Let's do that again. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? No. Yeah, so it didn't work out. No.
All right, Mr. Speaker, very quickly. But you heard the question about our projections. Mr. Speaker, but we cannot lose the CBI, yeah? We cannot lose the CBI. That 60% is very, very, very important to us. Because, Mr. Speaker, if that is affected too badly, and I would like to ask the minister, the member for Granby to help me, is not only supporters of the government, the non-supporters of the government that will, how you say it, suce sell? Help me now. So, yeah, no, Mr. Speaker, suck salt. It's not only members that not supporting the government that will suck salt, Mr. Speaker. Plenty more people will suck salt. Right? We're moving on to the international airport, Mr. Speaker. Something there is very confusing because the way we're spending money on the international airport, Mr. Speaker, by the time it is finished, we would have paid up for it completely at the rate we're spending money, right? Now, last year, we see what the figures is. We already document. We're not going to go into it. This year, but that was $151 million over what we had budgeted for the international airport. And this year, we're asking for another $233,572,000. Mr. Speaker, for the avoidance of doubt, nothing is wrong with an international airport. We support it. It is a good venture. But nothing is preventing us from doing it right and making sure that everybody will benefit for it, Mr. Speaker. In closing, Mr. Speaker, time out. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
That's why they say,
Yes, Honorable Minister Blanchard, I recognize you. You may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, amazing. Absolutely amazing. Mr. Speaker, I beg your indulgence to read from my notes, please.
Permission granted.
Thank you, Honorable Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my amazing, absolutely amazing introduction was as I reflect on the budget presented on Tuesday. Mr. Speaker, so I rise, driven by my confidence in the vision and the leadership of this great Dominica Labour Party government, who over the years has undoubtedly transformed this beautiful island, Dominica. And I say so, Mr. Speaker, with no fear of contradiction, because, Mr. Speaker, I can see, I can hear anybody who says that this Dominica is the same Dominica they knew 20 years ago. I don't know if I can say it's lie. It's being dishonest. That's probably the parliamentary language. It's being dishonest. And I stand by my words. I am here standing supporting this budget because of my confidence in the vision of this party and the leadership of this party. I am on my feet, Mr. Speaker, to give my complete endorsement to the fiscal year 2023-2024 budget estimates before this House as I speak. And I am back. I am back in this honorable chamber, on this side of the House, working with sharp minds. Sharp minds. And I am happy to be here, lending my voice, my effort, and my energies to continue the great work of this Labour Party government. First, of course, for the good and wonderful people of the Roseau North constituency. And to Mr. Speaker, for the rest of the population, for all Dominicans. Before I go further, Mr. Speaker, allow me to extend congratulations to the Minister for Finance and the member for the Roseau Valley constituency, Dr. the Honorable Irving McIntyre, on the presentation of this, his first budget statement. Mr. Speaker, you realize that for the first time in almost 20 years, in almost 2 decades, the Honorable Prime Minister is not at the helm of this important, critical ministry. So you understand, Mr. Speaker, why Dominicans far and wide waited with a bated breath for the fiscal year 2023-2024 budget address. And so trust me when I say, it did not disappoint. No, it didn't. In fact, like the young people say, it was on point. And if I may say in my humble opinion, Mr. Speaker, I think it was just an amazing budget. And I wish to take this opportunity to commend the Honorable Minister again on his presentation of a financial package that captures the social and economic circumstances of our country and the identification of reasonable measures devised to address some of our challenges. So I say to the member for the Roseau Valley constituency, great job. Take a bow, Honorable Minister for Finance. I'm going back to the estimates, Mr. Speaker. As I reflected on the budget statement and the estimates in preparation for my contribution today, the words that came to my mind included impressive, appropriate, awesome, timely, transformational, reinforcing, strategic, or in my new favorite word, simply amazing. And I say amazing because there's no doubt that we got it right again. We, Mr. Speaker, being this Dominica Labour Party government. Mr. Speaker, in spite of the uncertainty in the global economy, fueled by a number of factors which were clearly identified in the budget address, and those include the lingering effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, particularly on the fiscal accounts of this government, the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine, which has manifested itself in a rise in inflation, the observed increase in imports, and consequently the general rise in local prices, which we call imported inflation, Mr. Speaker. And the continued threats associated with global warming, this forward-thinking government has chosen to be strategic and to prepare for the future. For the avoidance of doubt, I say we got it right again because this budget is focusing on major investments in the productive sectors, including agriculture, tourism, manufacturing, geothermal. And I was so happy when I heard the senator on the other side of the House confirm this, as he said he read in the ECCB's report. This budget, and we got it right, also included major investments in large projects that will lay the foundation or continue to lay the foundation for growth and expansion of our local economy. And these include the much-awaited international airport. Yes, Mr. Speaker, the airport coming. I'm just listing this for now, but you can imagine I'm going to return to that important project. Other major investments to the road network. And I liked the Chinese expression, which has worked for them, and I'm sure it will work for us too. And that Chinese expression is, if you want to be wealthy, build a road first. And if you think back of the number of investments we have had in to upgrade our road network, we are following suit because we know it is important and it will work for us too. Mr. Speaker, other major investments in the budget include a marina at Cabritz, 5-star hotels, a geothermal project, not only to reduce the cost for us here in Dominica, but also the cost of production locally, which will make us more competitive and allow us to be able to attract additional foreign direct investment, foreign savings, to complement what we have to grow and expand this economy, Mr. Speaker. Also, Mr. Speaker, job creation through the expansion of the private sector and the general diversification of our economy. And there is no doubt, Mr. Speaker, we are continuing to build for the future. Over the past 8 months or so, there's been much talk about the national reset. It comes as no surprise, therefore, Mr. Speaker, that this year's presentation was this Labour Party government's articulation of that national reset in words and in numbers. And as a proud member of this government, I will speak to it as I continue to lend my support to this budget. But before I do so, Mr. Speaker, allow me to take the people of Dominica back to November 2022, when the Honorable Prime Minister made the bold announcement, the call for a national reset. What was going on in Dominica at that time? What was going on globally? From a quick Google search, Mr. Speaker, I was able to find out that there was much uncertainty globally. In fact, the International Monetary Fund, in its October 2022 World Economic Outlook stated, and I quote, "Global economic activity is experiencing a broad-based and sharper than expected slowdown, with inflation higher than seen in several decades," end quote. Inflation higher than seen in several decades. And is the World Economic Outlook talking about the global economy? Yes. We're part of the global economy, right, Mr. Speaker? That's right. I think that speaks for itself. The report goes on to say, and I quote, "The cost of living crisis, tightening financial conditions in most regions, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and the lingering COVID-19 pandemic all weigh heavily on the outlook," end quote. It concluded that the global growth is forecast to slow down from 6% in 2021 to 3.2% in 2022 and 2.7% in 2023. Mr. Speaker, that was a global macroeconomic outlook when the Prime Minister called for that national reset. And I dare say how bold, how strategic, how forward-thinking, how insightful, how perceptive. Our amazing Prime Minister and leader of government business in this honorable House. Our Prime Minister acknowledged the uncertainty globally and decided to be preemptive and to be strategic. And that is why, in my humble opinion, he decided to call for a national reset. It is therefore no surprise to me that the Honorable Prime Minister, in his wisdom back in November, knew the time was now. No wonder he has been called so many times a visionary leader. Visionary, because in spite of the fact that our local economy was buoyant, he realized that the uncertainty globally would eventually impact Dominica. And as fate would have it, a mere months later, in May 2023, the outlook was no different. The May 2023 IMF Economic Outlook declared, and I quote, "The outlook is uncertain again amidst financial sector turmoil, high inflation, ongoing effects of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and 3 years of COVID," end quote. What a maverick, Mr. Speaker. What a political maverick indeed. As in spite of the fact that we're doing okay